Have you ever taken one of those personality quizzes where the answers are written so broadly that it could fit anyone's personality? That's a little bit what it's like when you look at the random suggested characteristics for a D&D character. If you look at the different backgrounds in the player's handbook, it's super vague and broad. It's supposed to be. It's meant to fit a bunch of different characters that any player might be playing. However, that means it's also not very helpful for really understanding who a character is. Specificity is the key to a character feeling unique, and when you're generic, it feels generic, and that shows. Hi, I'm Alex Schmidt. This is a 4-step process to story-driven character creation. Step 4, characteristics and final touches. If you haven't watched the previous steps, I suggest you start with step 1, which you should be able to find a link to here. I think I got that right. So during character creation, the player's handbook suggests having 2 personality traits, 1 bond, 1 flaw, and 1 ideal. That's probably fine. You could probably fill that out based on what you've already created for your character through the previous 3 steps without really even thinking about it. Just don't use the suggested ones. Make specific ones about your character. Be specific. For example, Beatrice, the character that we've been taking through all these steps, she's curious to a fault. She is overwhelmingly motherly. Her bond's a little bit harder since she specifically lost all of her previous relationships, but I would say that she still has a bond with her parents, just one that has been strained. Her flaw is definitely that she is incredibly impulsive, and her ideal is that with power comes the responsibility to protect others. Well, that was pretty straightforward. We're done, right? Well, not quite. So if you've read any of the most recent D&D books, you may have seen that there have been some things that have been added to this. For example, in the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, there's the Heroic Chronicle, and in the Mythic Odyssey of Theros, there's Supernatural Gifts. Both of these add specific details about your character, most notably the Heroic Chronicle adding short-term and long-term goals. However, they're both tied to mechanical benefits, and depending on what game you're playing and what your DM wants, those may not be things that actually exist for you, so you can't just use them in any game. There are definitely benefits to mechanizing these features, but it does require that the entire group, including the DM, be on board, which they may or may not be. So separate from mechanics and what's already been done, what useful characteristics are there? Well, first off, I would suggest writing down a long-term goal. What does your character want in the big picture? This generally ties back to something in your backstory. For example, with Beatrice, she wants to be accepted by her people. Next, you'll want a single short-term goal. What is their next step? For new characters, that can be pretty basic. It can be something as simple as making enough money that I have a place to sleep and food to eat tomorrow. You generally want the short-term goal to be a step towards the long-term goal. But even in that case, having enough food to eat and a place to sleep is a step towards being accepted by my people, because if I don't survive, I'm never going to be accepted by my people. Short-term goals will also be something that you'll want to be advancing over the course of the game. When you complete a short-term goal, write down a new one. It's also okay to actually have 2 or 3 at the same time. After all, there are multiple ways to be working towards something all at once. And actually, in addition, it's okay to have multiple long-term goals. Sometimes these will be in opposition to each other. A real-life example of this would be finding love and graduating from college. These don't have to be in opposition. You can do these things together, but depending on what happens in life, sometimes they get in the way of each other. So for Beatrice, a short-term goal would be figuring out how to protect her friends without making anyone get hurt. That's a little bit more long-term than finding a place to sleep, but it's a really basic, how do I be a friend to my friends before trying to figure out how do I get accepted by these people who don't accept me. After you have both of these things, you'll want a driving motivation. This should be generally a single word or phrase. Usually it's an emotion. After you have that single word or phrase, you can flesh it out with another sentence. Some examples are greed, I want to be wealthy. Apathy, killing is what I know how to do, and it puts food on the table. Love, my friends will need me, and I will be there when they do. These are somewhat similar to ideals, but where ideals are what you want to be, driving motivations are why you're doing what you're doing, what drives you, what pushes you to take an action when you're not thinking. Like goals, a character's motivations can shift over time, so do not hesitate to change those, or even have a couple written down, and maybe one or another may push a character just depending on where they are today. For Beatrice, her motivation would be guilt. She feels like she wasn't able to protect her family when she needed to, and when she finally could, it was too little too late. So after you have these characteristics down, it's just the final touches. You'll want to mark down the basics like skin color, hair color, eye color, what they tend to dress in, presenting gender, and height. But in addition to that, it's a good idea to write down a short description of what people notice when they first see your character. Beatrice is a female halfling, dark skin, frizzy dark hair, violet eyes, tends to wear peasant clothing. When you first see Beatrice, it's easy to glance her over and ignore her as another peasant halfling. That is until you see her eyes. Her deep violet eyes look at you like she can pierce your very soul. That way you have a quick hook for the other players to quickly remember something about what your character looks like. That's really useful for first introductions especially. Finally, we have alignment. Alignment is, frankly, mostly a holdover from previous editions of D&D, and doesn't matter very much. There's almost nothing mechanical in the game that is impacted by your alignment, and it's more of a description of a very broad sense of who your character is, and people don't even always agree on what any given alignment means. I've definitely played characters in D&D games where I never decided the alignment, and no one ever noticed. It never mattered. If you are picking an alignment, pick something, jot it down, and don't worry about it too much. Is Beatrice neutral good or chaotic good? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Maybe I'll just throw neutral good down, and if it changes, it changes. And with that, you've got everything. You have a fully fleshed out character who's ready to play in a game, who will feel like a person from the get-go, yet continue to develop over the course of the campaign. Thanks for watching through the entire 4-step process of story-driven character creation. If you enjoyed this video, or the previous ones, please be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. Doing so lets me know what content people are enjoying and what they're not, and how I can make content that you're more likely to enjoy in the future. I'd love to hear in the comments what you think about the characteristics both in the player's handbook and the ones I've described here, as well as the most interesting motive you've ever seen a character have. In my next video, I'm going to talk about how to talk to your DM. I know that's a topic that sometimes gets thrown around as the thing to do, but not something that anyone ever talks about how to do it. Until then, keep telling stories.